Okay, welcome everyone. My name is William Edelglass, and I serve as Director of Studies at the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies here in Barre, Massachusetts, the traditional home of the Nipmuc Nation. And before introducing Andrea and Bob and their work with Dharma Voices for Animals, I wanted to give you some sense of the flow of the evening tonight. And first, if you would like to see text of what is being said running across the bottom of the page, if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen where all those buttons are, and you press the button which says live transcript and CC for closed caption, you can then get a written version of the words or something similar to the words because it doesn't always get the words right. The first part of our evening tonight is going to be a conversation that I will have with Bob and Andrea, asking them questions about Buddhism and animals and the work of Dharma Voices for Animals. And that conversation will be based in part on the articles that we shared on the webpage for this evening and the documentary that Dharma Voices for Animals made. And then we will open it up for questions from anybody who wants to pose a question or a comment. And you can send your questions to me via the chat, and I will copy and paste them and then ask them. If at any point you're having technical difficulties with any aspect of the technology, you can send an email to contact@buddhistinquiry.org. And I want to give a shout out and a thank you to my colleague Mindy for making all these logistical processes work so smoothly. While Andrea and Bob are speaking, you'll only be able to send messages in the chat to me. However, before we start, I would like to invite us to chat to the group what your name is and where you're calling in from, and it'll go to everybody. This, in some sense, this Zoom page, I suspect, is a sangha of sorts, a sangha of people who care deeply about animals in a way that is not always embodied in the Buddhist world, but is perhaps deeply resonant with a Buddhist orientation to our sentient companions. So, Cindy from Northern New Jersey, thank you. Bree from Ontario, good to see you, Bree. Denver, Colorado. Danbury, Connecticut. Coast, Miwok, California. New York, Illinois. It's still somewhat magical and mysterious to be calling in from all over the place. Living joyfully in the prairie in Denver, Colorado. Sarah, PCPS, Colorado, Washington. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So we'll start with some introductions. And Andrea Diaz grew up on a farm in Arizona and has become an animal rights advocate. She has a master's in global animal law from the Autonomous University, Barcelona. And she also has a degree in criminal justice from ASU, Arizona State University, where she was motivated to study criminal justice because so many of the people who she grew up with got caught up in the criminal justice system. She became an advocate and a vegan very quickly after seeing a movie or some footage from a chicken slaughterhouse online in 2016. And it seems that she has devoted a good portion of her life's energy since that time to organize hundreds of campaigns, protests, and educational events for a lot of different animal rights organizations. And importantly, she has worked as an investigator of factory farms and slaughterhouses in several countries, doing important and sometimes very dangerous work. And so a bow of gratitude to you for that, Andrea. And Andrea has also been drawn to the teachings of the Buddha and been a practitioner since 2018. Bob Isaacson is the president and CEO of Dharma Voices for Animals. He was a civil rights and human rights attorney for 25 years, with a particular focus in his practice of defending people who were facing the death penalty. And at a very young age, the age of 27, he won a landmark case that he argued at the Supreme Court, which limits the power of police to arrest people without sufficient grounds, being the second youngest attorney to appear before the Supreme Court in history. And he has been a deeply committed Buddhist practitioner for the last 30 years and has done many long retreats and is also a Dharma teacher in his own right. Bob joined with several friends in 2011, 14 years ago, to launch Dharma Voices for Animals. And Dharma Voices for Animals is now, I believe, the only Buddhist international animal organization, advocacy organization, and has countrywide projects in Thailand, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, and the US. And they focus on encouraging Buddhist temples and Buddhist communities to transition to plant-based food, supporting animal welfare legislation, and providing, importantly, you can't just exhort people to transition. They also provide plant-based cooking classes at Buddhist temples. So much for my introductions. My hope, Andrea and Bob, is that maybe as we begin, you could also share a little bit more of your path, both in the animal advocacy world and perhaps in the Buddhist world, if it's appropriate. And maybe starting with you, Andrea, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you came to do your work for Dharma Voices for Animals.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us also. So I was born and raised on a farm. I was there, the first 15 years of my life is when we had the farm. I've always had a close proximity, but also relationship to non-human animals. And as you said, I watched Cowspiracy one day, considered myself an avid animal lover. And once I saw the chicken slaughterhouse footage on Facebook, watched Cowspiracy same day, I went vegan that day. That was almost 8 years ago. So from there, I wanted to learn more. I wanted to do everything that I could to help. As you also stated, I had a bachelor's in criminal justice because I wanted to help other people in any way that I could. And once I realized what was happening to the animals, I just turned all of my attention toward them. I started doing activism in Phoenix, Arizona, started branching out to other cities. And something that I realized is a lot of people don't, at the time and still now, they don't really know exactly what happens in farms and slaughterhouses, that the standard practices are hidden from the general public. And so I took it upon myself to buy a camera from the pawn shop and go into farms and slaughterhouses and just share with the world what was happening to these animals. So I spent a lot of my time as an activist doing that in the United States, in Spain, and in Mexico to film, anything from factory farms to backyard farms. So with that, I actually found Buddhism and meditation because of what I had seen in these farms. To be quite frank, I developed panic disorder from witnessing the suffering that these animals endure every day. And I was suffering myself. I was carrying their suffering with me. having panic attacks every day. And I discovered meditation. That was in 2018. And from there, I wanted to do more. So I went and I did my my master's degree. And as I was looking for a job, I found Dharma Voices for Animals, which was an amazing intersection between, two things that I really cared about, fighting for animal liberation and the Dharma. So I found DVA almost 2 years ago. And since then, I've been the operations director and really, really loving it here.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrea. Bob, if we could invite you to share some of the intersection for you of your Dharma life and animal advocacy and how you came to Dharma Voices for Animals.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having us, William, having us on. It's great. So I would say going back so I was a human rights lawyer, as you mentioned, and I did that for 25 years. And then I stopped because I wanted to practice Buddhism, not just meditating at home, but going on retreats. And I couldn't go on long retreats while I was doing a case, and I was always doing a bunch of cases. I represented people not only in the Supreme Court, but also in jury trials, mostly in Chicago, but also in San Diego. People facing the death penalty. So I came upon Buddhism, and I retired. I'm still in my 40s for my law practice. And I started seeing the disconnect between the Buddhist teaching about non-harming, that we should not harm sentient beings, and compassion, or karuna, and the actual practice at centers and Buddhist leaders, Buddhist teachers, etc. So I started talking to people, like advocating. It was mostly just asking questions, like scratching my head and asking Western teachers. So I had access to a lot of the really well-known Western teachers about that disconnect. And no one seemed very comfortable talking about it. And my talking to people, I'd talk to people on retreats, I would be emailing teachers, I met them outside of the retreat centers, and I was getting nowhere fast. Nothing was happening. They were all listening to me. Some of them were like just arguing with me. I was trying not to do that. I just wanted to talk to people. But nothing was happening. No one was changing. And then another person and I decided we needed David Blatt. We needed to, he was an animal rights lawyer. We needed to have an organization in order to have some credibility, some power. So we started DVA. And Tim Sterling and Patty Brightman joined us, well-known animal activists themselves. So we started out in California. We became a nonprofit here, NGO 501c3. And then I realized that we had to get out of California because all the Buddhists are living in Asia, almost 99%. We're estimating at least 600 million, maybe even 1 billion, depending on how many in China, we don't know, Buddhists in the world. And so I started going out there in 2014, and we started our projects. So we started Sri Lanka 2017, and then Thailand in 2020, Vietnam 2018. And so we're going to tell you more details. This is just the introduction about what we're doing in those countries. And then US, we actually formed. So we've worked with different US centers, Spirit Rock, IMS Forest Refuge, Insight Retreat Center, Insight Meditation Center, in the Southern Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And we've had really good results with those places, but it's really been hard to change the habits of the centers. The Asia projects are going great. People just seem to be more open to change in the 3 countries of Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. So that's my story. I'm really happy to be here. I see some familiar faces and look forward to our time together.
So thank you, Bob. I sometimes have the feeling that the biggest teaching of this kind of an event is just seeing people who have dedicated their lives to something. And I'm inspired and humbled by the two of you. Maybe before we get into a discussion of Buddhism and animals and the ethical issues, Andrea, would you be willing to say a little bit more about what doing this work might mean for you personally as a practitioner and as a Buddhist, just so we have that to hold with us before we go into the more doctrinal questions?
Absolutely. So when I started doing this work, I didn't know much about Buddhism. I just was there to get the truth about the animals out to the people. And I can just say, and this is a fact, that the absolute worst that we can imagine those places to be, it's a million times more horrific. The standard practices that exist today, and factory farming didn't exist in the time of the Buddha. And so just seeing the reality of how trillions of animals live every year, and now understanding the Dharma and the teachings of the Buddha, for me, there's no alignment between the two. Some can argue that if the Buddha were here today, he would also be vegan. If anybody walks into a farm or slaughterhouse and sees what's happening to these animals, you can see their suffering. And as Buddhists, we're to minimize suffering. So there is a lot of alignment between the two. Now, as a Buddhist, as I said, I could never not be vegan.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. So on the webpage for this event, we shared links to the Dharma Voices for Animals documentary film, Animals and the Buddha, as well as two articles. One is called Right Eating, What the Buddha Taught, and the other is Friends, Not Food. And I'd like to move now to a passage from Friends, Not Food, which was an article, Bob, you originally published in Lion's Roar magazine in April of 2019. And there you begin your article with the observation that while many people might think that Buddhists tend to be vegetarians, just like people think that Buddhists are pacifists, most Buddhists around the world actually do eat meat. Nevertheless, you point out that from the available texts that we have, it would seem that the Buddha actually did suggest that we should abstain from any action that might take the life of sentient beings. So maybe we can start here with what the texts actually say about the Buddha and eating meat, and perhaps even more specifically, what you're focusing on towards the beginning of that article is the first precept and the role of the precepts in Buddhist life. Maybe we could start there.
Great. So thanks, William. Yeah. When I first came to the Dharma, so it was almost 30 years ago, I was really surprised when I started talking to people that so many people were eating animals. They weren't vegetarian, let alone vegan. And immediately I felt the disconnect. And then soon after, when I started trying to talk to people about that with an eye to change their mind, but I was pretty soft in my approach. I just wanted to find out where people were coming from. It seemed like people were really uncomfortable talking about it, and especially the teachers, as I mentioned, just didn't want to talk about it. So the Buddha, Panatipata, Varamani, Sikapatam, Samadhiyami, as they take the precept to refrain from, interpreted as killing a being or harming a being. I mean, either way, it's hard to reconcile that with biting into, chewing, and swallowing animal flesh. The animals that we eat are clearly sentient beings. There years ago was confusion about whether aquatic animals, fish, for example, could feel. They're so different from us. They breathe in underwater and they suffocate out of the water. They clearly can. I mean, all scientific research has shown that. There's no question that fish are sentient beings. So they're protected by the words of the Buddha. Also, we have the Dhammapada, which is I got this in Thailand. It's a very short group of teachings, and in the Dhammapada, I want to get the exact quote. Here it is. The Buddha said, "All beings fear danger. Life is dear to all. When a person considers this, he does not kill or cause to kill." And it's all over the Dhammapada, the cause to kill. So, I mean, what does that mean in our context? So, a lot of Western teachers will say that, well, I'm not killing the animal, so I'm not violating the precept. But the Buddha went far beyond that, talking about cause to kill. There are many passages in the Dhammapada where the language refrains from causing to kill. So certainly when we're eating an animal, we're causing, if not the death of that animal, the death of the next animal. That's what Bhikkhu Bodhi talks about and says that specifically in our film Animals and the Buddha. An animal will die if you're eating an animal, whether it's at a restaurant or in a store, a food store, or whatever. And we all know that the animals we're eating are sentient beings. One other passage, William and y'all, that I wanted to mention, and this is sometimes overlooked when we talk about this. So the Buddha in the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the fourth noble truth, the fourth truth of the Four Noble Truths, talked about wise or right livelihood. And things are in there like shouldn't be executing people. That's not wise livelihood. Okay, I was a death penalty lawyer. I was trying to prevent the execution. Also, the equivalent for animals, don't slaughter animals. But he went far beyond that. And he also said, should not be raising animals for slaughter. So even though you're not killing the animal, if you're part of the process, it leads to the death of an animal, such as raising them for slaughter or biting into them, chewing them, swallowing them, purchasing them, you're certainly part of the process that leads to the death of an animal. And so it seems clear to me that the Buddhas, and this of course is for Theravadan Buddhists, and I don't want to leave out what is said in the Mahayana Sutras because it's even stronger than this. So it's pretty hard to reconcile the eating of animals with the teachings of the Buddha. Now, the Buddha did carve out, I want to mention the three purities. The Buddha did carve out an exception for monks. When monks go on alms rounds, so today I am told, and I checked this out in Thailand, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka, there aren't many monks that are being fed by alms rounds, but there are some. So the Buddha was trying to support a symbiotic relationship between the monastic community on the one hand and the lay community on the other hand. So the nuns and the monks would offer the Dhamma, and the lay community would feed the nuns and monks, provide medicine for them, give them shelter when necessary, etc. So he carved out a rule. This is in the Pali Canon, in the Theravadan tradition, and specifically the three purities appear in Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 55. And there, the Buddha set out requirements before a monastic on alms rounds can be allowed to eat animal flesh. And what he said there was, if you see or hear or merely suspect the animal has been killed for you, then you're not allowed to eat it. Eat the animal. So, like, what effect does this have, or what application does this have in modern day? Well, as Guy Armstrong says, Guy, by the way, has been my teacher for some 23, almost 24 years now. he says in our film, if you've seen our film, you know this. It sure feels to him if you go to the supermarket and buy a breast of chicken that the chicken's been killed for you. Or as Bhikkhu Bodhi said, okay, maybe that animal wasn't killed for you. The next one will be, because once you take that off the shelf, there will be an order placed, which will certainly lead to the death of the next animal. So I think this is really for the things to remember about the Jivaka Sutta, because this becomes one of the most common excuses that folks give, Buddhists give, to justify their eating animals. It's limited to monks. It's all about the careful or delicate balance between monastic community on the one hand and lay community on the other hand, and if you go into the store, if a monastic goes to the store to buy food, he's back where Guy's talking about. With if you take that off the shelf, another animal is going to be killed. So it seems to me that even in Theravadan Buddhism, where the answer to the question, should Buddhists eat animals, is not quite as clear as it is in Mahayana. So let's go to Mahayana. And if you take a look at our movie, you've seen, I hope you've watched it. If not, you have a chance to watch it. By the way, it's been translated into 12 languages, all the major Asian languages, Chinese, Vietnamese, etc., except Japanese. If anyone knows a Japanese interpreter that would translate, it's not a very long transcript. It's pretty short. Please let me know. I've been looking for a long time. I can't find it. But we have all the major languages, Spanish also, German, Finnish, etc. So in our film, we make it really clear by citing the Lankavatara Sutra. And repeatedly in that sutra or Mahayana text, the Buddha is thought to be vegetarian and wanting all of his followers to also be vegetarian. And there are other passages in other sutras that make it clear. So in the Mahayanas, in the Mahayana tradition, there's really no wiggle room at all. You can't even rely on the Jivaka Sutta because the message of the Buddha directly says, don't eat animals, be vegetarian like me. So that's really the crux of the argument, of the position. It's so difficult to reconcile compassion. I'm always slightly taken aback, and when I'm in the sometimes in altered states, when I'm samatha and samadhi, peacefulness, tranquility on the one hand, and concentration on the other hand. When we, as a group, as a sangha on these retreats, we send metta to all beings. But at the same time, I know a lot of people in the hall and some people sitting up front, some of the teachers are eating the animals. Not on the retreat that I'm on, because those retreat centers are vegetarian or mostly vegan, but when they go home. So this is the crux of it. And Andrea's seen firsthand. I only watch films. I've never been in a slaughterhouse. I've never been in a factory farm myself. But it is 1,000 times worse than you can ever imagine. And so this is our plea. This is why we started DVA. No one's speaking for animals. No one wants to talk about it. So we started this. We want to get people talking about it, and we want to advocate for the animals. We want to be their voice because they don't have any voice that we can understand.
Great. Thank you, Bob. I think you answered most of the questions that I prepared. So what you're saying is that there's this famous sutta which seems to give a way out for Theravada Buddhists. And the way out is that, well, if this animal wasn't killed specifically for you, then it's okay to eat it. And what you're pointing out is that it's a much more complex situation, and that as Guy Armstrong says in the film, and Bhikkhu Bodhi, essentially, if you go into a restaurant or if you go into a store and purchase an animal product, it may not have been specifically for you, but you are creating a market force such that another animal will be killed because people like you go in and buy it. But that in the Mahayana tradition, there are certainly texts which make it very, very clear that vegetarianism is the appropriate way to be on the path, essentially. Philip Glass has a wonderful essay where he talks about Philip Glass, the composer, who's a longtime Buddhist practitioner. Oh. He actually has an essay where he says, you know, setting aside all the arguments for a little while, he writes, for him, vegetarianism is essentially a practice. He thinks of it as a practice, just as his other Buddhist practices. So in the articles that we shared, you mentioned a UN report on the environmental impact. I don't know if it was the livestock's long shadow, that report, which suggested that I think 18% of climate emissions, greenhouse gases, come from the global animal industry. That includes transportation, nitrous oxide, deforestation, carbon dioxide, methane, but that the animal industry is a huge contributor to climate change, more even than transportation sector.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you would be willing to say a few words. Obviously, there wasn't climate change in the time of the Buddha. And so, but the principle of non-harming or non-killing is still operative. And how climate change might, and other environmental impacts of the global livestock industry, especially the water runoff in many communities, how that might impact our action and our sense of morality as Buddhist practitioners. Yeah. Andrea, I don't know, are you?
Sure, yeah.
Andrea, do you want to take that one?
Sure.
Oh, Andrea, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Sure. So obviously the environment is really important to Buddhists. We have to maintain our home to maintain who we are. So just a couple points with that. One, you mentioned water pollution and the runoff. There are currently 415 ocean dead zones around the world where life can no longer be sustained. And that's primarily from the runoff from farms, from the fertilizer, from the pesticides. We're killing our oceans. It's said that we're going to have fishless oceans within our lifetime. And as people who care about our planet and about others, this is something we really have to take note of and really think about. You know, in addition to the water pollution, you have deforestation. Animal agriculture accounts for the most land usage out of every sector. We're demolishing hectares and hectares of land every day for not only where the livestock live, but also the food that we're feeding, the soy and the corn that we're feeding to the livestock. And I use that in terms, but we know for the farmed animals, you know, they're producing only 18% of the world's calories and 37% of the total protein on such a major portion of land. In addition to that, you have the water that we're using. The water footprint alone for, you know, beef, for meat, for dairy, for eggs is so much higher than for plant-based foods. We can't sustain these numbers, and that's why a complete shift to a plant-based food system is necessary for our survival. We're living right now in the sixth mass extinction, and we're losing animals, so many animals. The wildlife populations decreased 69% in the last 50 years. We're losing our homes. So as I said, a shift is so necessary at this point.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to point out that Jonathan shared a sutta with me from the numerical discourses. in the section on the fours, 4.264, which also is a pretty clear instance of the Theravada critique of killing animals, supporting killing animals in any respect. So thank you for that, Jonathan. I'm wondering if we could turn now to some of the work that Dharma Voices for Animals is doing and hear about some of your projects. I think probably some people on this call are familiar with Dharma Voices for Animals, and I imagine many people on this call are familiar with some of the Buddhist arguments against eating meat, killing animals. But I personally was not familiar with the work of Dharma Voices for Animals in Asia. And I am hoping we can hear some more. And maybe, Andrea, we could start with you and hear a little bit about the project in Vietnam.
Sure. So Vietnam is a country of about 60 million Buddhists. Bob, please fact check me if I'm wrong there. So 60 million Buddhists out of 100 million people. And we have, perhaps the most famous pagoda there. Phap Van works very closely with DVA. They've built us a kitchen where we have our vegan chefs go and share with people how to cook vegan food, because all of the monastics in Vietnam, they're vegan, and all of the food served in the pagodas is plant-based as well. So the biggest hurdle that we've seen is people, they'll eat plant-based in the pagoda, but when they go home, they don't know what to cook. They don't know how to make plant-based food. It tastes delicious. So one thing we really want to help with is crossing, that barrier. So teaching them which ingredients, how they can make their same traditional foods, but not harm animals. And so we actually have Phap Van, the abbot there. He was a student of Thich Nhat Hanh, which is one of the most famous vegan monastics in the world. And so he works with us. We also sponsor food for events where they give Dhamma talks, where they speak about the benefit of plant-based living and the ethical aspect. And so we're giving, we're donating food to 3,000 to 5,000 people at a time. It's our smallest project in terms of how many people work there, but we have a really big impact in Vietnam.
Great, thank you, Andrea. I love the fact that you're offering cooking classes, which is such a concrete way of supporting people and making this transition. Bob, would you be willing to share a little bit about what DVA is doing in Sri Lanka?
Sure. So Sri Lanka, although it's the smallest country of the three by far, almost 16 million Buddhists out of a population of about 22 million. It's an island nation just off the southeast coast of India. And there's somewhat of a tradition there of at least vegetarianism, not so much veganism, but vegetarianism. They have curry, much like Indians eat curry, so do Sri Lankans. But they don't use ghee or butter in the base of the curry. Instead, they use coconut milk or coconut water. And so it's like a prime place to go vegan. So about 2 years ago, we produced, I don't know if you could see this, 10,000 sort of thin copy, nicely illustrated. It's all, of course, all in Sinhala, the native language, 105 vegan recipes. And we released 10,000 of these. We gave them mostly to the temples. There's about 8,000 Buddhist temples in the country. And so people can go there, get a copy. They're not allowed to take it home. They can make copies of the recipes, simple recipes in here. And we have a television show, a weekly television show, where a celebrity talks about and actually cooks on screen one of the 105 recipes here. It's a very popular show. And we also have a radio show going now for about 5 years, every Friday morning in Sri Lanka. It's actually Thursday night here, but Friday morning in Sri Lanka. And we have sometimes celebrities talking about the ethical responsibility of Buddhists in not eating animals. We have show business personalities, etc. That's widely listened to. It comes out of Kandy, the Buddhist, the capital of the Buddhist kingdom, the ancient kingdom of Kandy. Our biggest program, though, is what we do pretty much every day. We certainly do it every week. And this is, we talk to people one-on-one. I'm very proud to say that in 2023, we spoke to almost 100,000 people one-to-one. When I say one-to-one, I mean either in a temple, a lot of women's groups we talk to, police academies, we have a police officer, army posts. We've gotten average about 1,200 soldiers to come to our presentations. They're usually PowerPoint. Sometimes it gets a little stuffy inside. It can be really hot in Sri Lanka. It might go outside, and then of course we're not using PowerPoint then. It's just one of our regional coordinators. We have 15 of them around the island nation, and they're averaging about 8 or 9 presentations every month. So we got 1,150 presentations last year, almost 100,000, and this year we're blowing those numbers out of the water. So these are just a few highlights of what we're doing in Sri Lanka. We have the support of not necessarily, the monastics are all over the place. Most of them are not vegetarian, but they really respect what we're doing. And our longest standing board member besides me is Bhante Sati. He's a well-known Sri Lankan American monk. He's now a U.S. citizen. And he started, and those that come to our Sunday sangha or retreat, the last Sunday of every month, know Bhante, because he teaches, he'll teach one month, I'll teach another month. Sometimes we'll teach together. And so he knows everybody in Sri Lanka. He used to be the Dharma teacher, the Dhamma teacher for the president's wife. So we have access there, and we're right on the verge of passing a countrywide huge animal welfare bill. We got the votes. We've had the votes now for about 3 years. If we can get it to the parliament before the parliament is disbanded, we will pass it. So this might happen the next couple of weeks. That's just a small portion of what we're doing in Sri Lanka, but Sri Lanka rocks.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the way in which you all are thinking so strategically and effectively, having a famous personality, cooking the recipes and thinking about how change actually happens. Andrea, would you be willing to say a little bit about what DVA does in the United States, closer to home for many of us?
Sure. So the U.S. Centers Project is our newest project. It's about 2.5 years old. So we've really been laying the foundation for the project. We've created a database with hundreds of Buddhist centers from all traditions. And it was curated by a team of amazing volunteers, some who are actually on this call now, so thank you for that. We've encouraged change, major change at Spirit Rock, IMS Force Refuge, and Insight Retreat Center in the Bay Area. We're really encouraging these centers to watch our film Animals in the Buddha. We're offering so many free resources, cookbooks. We're working with other organizations to help really cater cookbooks for different centers to, again, cook the cultural foods for those centers. We are offering grants to help supplement the cost for, plant-based foods so that people can try them. And recently, a new project we're working on, we're really, really excited about this, is that we have a prominent U.S. environmentalist who's going to be actually doing presentations for these centers to talk about the scientific evidence that encourages plant-based diet. So we're still working on building this project up, but we're really excited about it.
Great. There's a Barre Center for Buddhist Studies cook on this call who's also a vegan.
There he is. Zach, I didn't even notice you there. How you doing, man?
That's Zach.
How are you? I was looking at you. I thought, I know that guy. I didn't see your. Hi.
So
a long time. How you doing, Zach? I
know that there are some cooks at these centers who are vegan. You're muted. So.
Yeah, well, Zach had a lot to do with the transition at IMS and Forest Refuge. We've been talking since 2011. We met way back then. So, yeah, man, good to see you.
And And maybe just to hear about the last countrywide program.
Thailand.
You're working in Thailand also, just to get a sense of what you're doing
Yeah.
there.
So, yeah, so again, thanks for the question. I love talking, as you can tell, about DVA. So Thailand is truly amazing. So I started going there, I think it was 2017, and we started a chapter, 5, 6, 7 people. And I'd go with one, all these folks were bilingual, speaking English as well as Thai. We'd go to some of the biggest wats in Bangkok. And I would politely scratch my head and ask, so does anybody, are there any vegetarians? Do people, any of the monks and nuns prefer vegetarian food? And I was getting nowhere. The monastics, I talked to a lot of the abbots of the biggest wats or temples in Bangkok. They did not want to hear from a guy in California about compassion. They have their own role models. So completely changed the strategy there in 2020, right before COVID. I was there in February 2020 for about a week or 10 days, as I remember. And I saw the newspaper, they had an English newspaper at the hotel dining room. I was eating breakfast. And it talked about a study had been done comparing the health of monastics in Thailand versus the health of lay people. And they found that the monks were much less healthy. It dawned on me that because the monks there were just eating everything put in front of them, that this was leading to perhaps leading to their unhealthiness. So we're talking heart disease and cancer and high blood pressure and obesity and diabetes. So I still had a couple days left, and I asked my interpreter to come with me to a couple of the big wats. I went to Mahatat and Sutat. Mahatat is one of the most prominent. It's actually although it's in Thailand, it's in the tradition of Mahasi Sayadaw, the Burmese master. I met the abbot. It's not hard for a guy that looks like me to walk into a wat and actually get an audience with the top monk there. And that's what happened to Mahatat. And instead of talking about animals or environment, I said to him, I had a connection, a doctor who was a vegan doctor who was willing to go to the wats and talk to them about health. And I mentioned this to the abbot at Mahatat, and I asked him if he'd be willing to invite this doctor, this medical doctor, and he said he was. And he was like really happy. And he told me he had diabetes and he was worried about his health, as he should have been. And then I went to Sutat, I think it was called, Sutat, it was called. This was a royal temple there. I had the same reaction from the person I was speaking to. I started thinking, this is maybe what we should do. Let's drop the compassion aspect because it's going nowhere. Instead, talk about the health of the monks. There are 300,000 monastics. Almost all of them are men, because women, as you might know, cannot be ordained in Thailand. There's very, very few nuns in Thailand. I've heard a couple hundred. I don't know if that's true or not. There aren't many. By the way, most of the women monastics are at least vegetarian. There's some are vegan, and practically none of the men are. So this is where we were looking at it now from the health point of view. And then the most amazing thing happened. I gave a public talk at DVA, the Buddhist, the Bangkok International Vegan Alliance. Maybe 30, 40 people. After I finished my talk, and I was talking about our new strategy in Thailand, a young guy comes up to me and introduces himself. It turns out this is going to be Dr. Banks. Dr. Bank is almost at that point, now he is a PhD in public health from Chulalongkorn University. I'm told by a guy who spent a lot of time out there, it's the top university in the country. So he got his PhD, and he's our director of our operations there in Thailand. And so we've been to about 130 wats, most of the big ones, a lot of the royal wats that have a lot of prestige, talking to monks about their own health, PowerPoint presentations. And now we're working with another monk. His name is the Venerable Lin, Lin, and he had diabetes, serious case. He's taken insulin shots for a number of years. He came to and discovered veganism, completely cured himself of the disease. And now we call him our Team B. So he goes out sometimes with Dr. Banks, sometimes by himself, and he gives presentations. And you can bet the monks are listening to him because he is one of their own. So this is our strategy in Thailand. We've given about 15 cooking classes. Just recently, this past week, we signed an agreement with one of the prestigious Wats. By the way, there are 33,000 Buddhist temples or Wats in Thailand. We signed a memorandum agreement with one of the top temples there, one of the top Wats, that they are going to do a meatless, a vegan Saturday. And then another Wat has agreed to do this. And now our strategy is not changing, but it's embracing, turning at least one day a week in these Wats. You know, this is a country where monks are required to accept what is offered. So there's some, let's say, texture to that. There's some wiggle room, but they can't just say I'm not going to eat this, I'm not going to eat that. So we are now getting to the place. One more story I want to share with you, and that is I was at a presentation that Bank gave about a year and a half ago, before Andrea and I went out there. The presentation was about these really terrible diseases, and you reduce your risk, of course, as many of you know, by having a plant-based diet, cancer, heart disease, etc. And during the presentation, we're still masked, so it must have been in 2022. The head monk, the abbot, asks a question in Thai, and then Bank says to me, I'm sitting on the side just watching, and of course I don't understand what's being said. He brings the mic to me and says, the abbot wants to know if we can talk directly to the followers. There are 65 million Buddhist followers in Thailand. This is just one temple. So I said, of course we can. So now we have a brochure that looks something like this. It's 8 pages, it's colorful, it's in both Thai and in English. And now we printed thousands of copies. We're distributing these to the lay community, and we're actually talking to lay community. When Andrea and I were out there, Mahatat, we went back to Mahatat, which I told you about before. There were, I don't know, what do you say, maybe 20 or 30, mostly women in white. And they were the followers, and they were listening to us because they're the ones that bring the food to the Wats. So we've increased or expanded our target audience to include the lay community, the followers who actually are feeding the monastics. So I can go on all night, but we don't have time for it, talking about Thailand. So thanks.
Okay, great. I have a handful of questions, and maybe we could turn to them now. One of them is a question about the effort to encourage Dharma centers in the US to transition to vegan kitchens. If you could share a little bit more about that effort and how it's going and where we are with it. Andrea, do you want to take that one?
So for the US centers?
Yes.
Sure. So again, it's a newer program. We really wanted to build the foundation. So now we have information on just about every single center in the United States. So at this point, we actually are going to be hiring a US Centers project director. And with that person, we have the foundation that our previous director, Carrie, left. And so we have just a plethora of different resources. One is sorry, the word is escaping me, is Animals in the Buddha. That itself, we want people to watch that. We have the environmental program. So again, this really prominent environmentalist is going to go and speak directly to the centers and the followers. In addition to that, we have grants to supplement the foods there. But really the biggest thing, and something we are going to be hiring for as well, we already have this laid out, is we want people to develop personal relationships with folks. So we want people to go in and talk to them directly. You know, we can sit here and cold email all day, but realistically, we want that real connection. So we are going to be hiring people to go into centers to find out what they're serving, who they're serving, and see if we can just help. All we want to do is give them information. We're working on this environmental, kind of like a spreadsheet that we want to hand out to people. It has so much information that can be beneficial, and it's a lot of work. Obviously, it's a lot of work. So we also have the Eyes and Ears program. I don't know, Bob, if you want to talk a little bit more about Eyes and Ears, where folks like you all here can help us with this mission.
Yeah, I thank you for that. If it's okay with William, but could you just say a few words about we're not everything you said we're doing, but then we're also going to we haven't yet done it, but let's start right now to say a word or two about the human rights issue that's there with slaughterhouse workers in the United States, and nobody's better qualified to do that than you.
Sure, sure. So, of course, before going into animal rights, I was more focused on human rights, doing a lot of protests, I received my bachelor's degree in criminal justice because, as I said, a lot of people I grew up with were in and out of the prison system, and I wanted to know why. And so there are a lot of human rights aspects to eating animal products that people often overlook. And as a Mexican American woman, as the great granddaughter of immigrants, it's really, really close to my heart because a lot of people who work in slaughterhouses are immigrants and ex-felons, people who normally can't get jobs easy in the United States. And with that, people don't grow up and want to work in a slaughterhouse. These people are essentially, they have no other choice but to work in these places. And a lot of things happen. For instance, there's a lot of discrimination that takes place in farms and slaughterhouses. I spent so many hours of my life on this website called Glassdoor, where you can read reviews for different companies. So I go into JBS Slaughterhouse, into any slaughterhouse in your neighborhood, and you can read the reviews that people are being discriminated against, and they can't say anything because they're so afraid of deportation. There are so many injuries that happen. People get sick all the time. If you're constantly around blood, urine, feces, dead bodies, then you're going to get sick. And that, leads on to another tangent about pandemics. But in addition to those, you've got substance abuse and domestic abuse are really prevalent amongst folks who work in farms and slaughterhouses. And it makes sense. You're actively killing an animal or seeing an animal have their life taken away. That's going to do something to you as a person. And it goes back to this circle of violence. They commit violence not only on the animal, but on their family members. And so, again, this is really important to me. We want to talk to people at U.S. centers about this because if the health is not important to you, if the environment is not important to you, if the ethics of the animal isn't important to you, then something we can all agree on is we don't want to cause harm to other humans. And so we're hoping that by bringing this matter forward more, that more folks will understand what's happening in these places and make the change for themselves.
Okay, thanks, Andrea.
Yeah.
Matt, just real quick, just on eyes and ears, because this is how to involve everyone that's listening to us and that may watch a video or whatever we're doing here. So, we had a formal program called Eyes and Ears, and I think I just want to invite all of you that if you go to a retreat center, a temple, a monastery, one time, or if you're a regular there, and let us know what's going on. The only way we're going to get change is if we come from the sangha of a center. We use the word center because that includes temple, monastery, retreat center. The only way we're going to do it is, best if you give them $1 million and they'll listen to you. But if you're just there and they see you there and you ask questions, it is great. And at least let us know about that. Just drop us an email. The email's friends@dharmavoicesforanimals.org. And you can check our website if you forget the link. Please send us that, just information, and maybe you have some insight. Maybe it's that they just hired a vegan chef there. Maybe this is somebody you want to connect to. Let us know about that. That's how we were able to get change at IMS Forest Refuge. That's how we were able to get change at Spirit Rock. It was a supervisor in the kitchen at Spirit Rock, now 3 in a row, that had been not vegan, but vegan friendly. I was just on retreat there in March, the month of March. And so I ate 27 lunches there, and 24 of them were 100% vegan. 3 were not, but then there were, really appropriate vegan alternatives. So this is a long way. 90% of the main meals were vegan. If you go back 15 years ago, before we started any advocacy at all, the number would be 0 out of 27. So we've come a long way, but we just in a few centers. We really need help in other centers. So if you know any information, or just saying you're willing to go there and to talk to somebody, and just kind of scratch the head and ask questions. How come at this center you're serving hamburgers and chicken? It's just could you explain it to me? Or is it possible to have a vegan alternative? Because I'm vegan and no other people are. So any information you can give us, send us an email, connect with us. And this is the way we're going to make change, is by having someone actually at the center that we're working with.
So thinking about your descriptions of what you're doing in Sri Lanka and Thailand and here in Vietnam, you've been thinking a lot about what is strategically most effective. And one of the questions that came in is, are arguments of health and environment more efficacious than animal ethics and compassion?
Yeah. So, it depends. I love the question, because that's where, so I'm strategic. When I was doing death penalty work, I was actually running the death penalty operations in Cook County, which is where Chicago was. I did it from the public defender's office. I was the death penalty coordinator. I had to think about the best way to save the most lives. That was my job. I did some of the cases myself, but we had 300 cases at any one time. Most of the cases were done by other people. So I would organize a strategy, just like what's going on with DVA. So that's my legacy to DVA. So sometimes in a place like Thailand, we can't go in there and say eating animals violates the first precept. You can't talk to monks about that. They'll just point to Ajahn Chah, who used to eat fish curry, or Ajahn Buddhadasa, who ate insects. You can't do it because they respect their elders, and they're asking them. I'm not asking them to disrespect their elders, but just look at it in a different light. But this is the way they take it. So we have to do something different. Yes, environment is important in Thailand, and we're now adding a component, a really important environmental component, and we're working in partnership because Dr. Bank has a connection, a friendship, an acquaintance who's one of the top environmentalists in the country. So we're going to add an environmental component. So our attitude is whatever works. The animals don't care why you're sparing their lives or why you're not killing them. If it's based on environment, if it's based on health, if it's based on the Amazon forest, if it's based on compassion. They don't care. So we're trying to find all the ways. And the reason I came to this, the reason I became vegetarian and vegan 20 years ago, was because because of compassion, not wanting to harm another living being. But not everyone comes at it that way. So yes, sometimes, and health is almost always a component. You heard about it in Vietnam. Andrea was talking about it. We have a film. You can see our film. It's created by one of the top documentary filmmakers in Vietnam. There's a link on our website. Up on the upper left hand, there's a drop down with you just click on the Vietnam Project. You can choose to listen or read it in Vietnamese or in English, and there's a link to a film. And if they ask people, are you vegetarian? Most of the answers are no. Next question, why? And almost everyone says it's not healthy to be vegetarian. By the way, the word vegetarian in Vietnamese means absolutely plant-based, 100%. Pure vegetarian is another way to say that. If you just say vegetarian, a Vietnamese will understand that as being vegan, no animal products at all. And almost all of them say it's health. One woman said, I'm concerned about my daughter who's going to college now, and she won't be able to study. She won't have enough energy if she doesn't eat animal flesh. She probably said she's vegetarian. So whatever works, but health is always a component. It's a component in Sri Lanka. It's a component. It's our main point in our main pitch in Thailand, and it's a major component in Vietnam because of this anecdotal information we're getting about why it is that people are not vegetarian or vegan.
So I think that response is also a deeply traditional Buddhist response. The doctrine of skillful means suggests that one employs whatever strategies or arguments are effective to reduce suffering. And maybe framed philosophically, one might think of it as moral pluralism, that there are multiple ethical principles at play, and one can draw out different ones at different times. Sometimes, though, those ethical principles might be in tension with each other. And there's a question that I wanted to raise that came in that I'm just going to read it. Is it okay for a Buddhist to work for a beef producer when that beef producer is at heart an environmental organization and saves many, many, many more lives of native animals and native plants than it has been responsible for having cows killed, and is in fact responsible for saving an extremely important local ecosystem? Would it be likely that the response would be something like, isn't there another way to protect those plants and animals in that ecosystem? And that would not be a useful response in this particular context, because the answer is no. The people who put together the organization I work for tried everything. They didn't want to have cows killed. They looked and looked and looked and could not find another option, and no one can these days either. I'm wondering if either of you have any reflections. And I should say, as someone who's an environmental philosopher, that this is something that environmental philosophers have been thinking about for a long time. It was particularly in the 70s and 80s, the tension between ecological values and animal rights values, which do come into conflict at times. And I'm curious if either of you have something you'd want to share here.
Yeah, I do have something to share. I appreciate the question. So real quick, there's it's called the Buddhist channel. It's an international channel. They have it in Malaysia. They have it in Sri Lanka. And there was somebody brought my attention to this in, I think it was in Malaysia. Somebody said, no, it was in Sri Lanka. People are subsistence fishing. I mean, they can't eat anything else. They're pulling the fish out of the water. How can you say this is wrong? My answer was, of course I can relate to that. It's a terrible situation to be. The Buddha was clear. That's not wise livelihood. You're killing the fish when you pull them out. I mean, it can't be any clearer, although one can feel and have a heart connection to the difficulty sometimes of the person asking the question. Same thing applies here. I mean, the Buddha clearly prohibited under wise livelihood of the Noble Eightfold Path, industry that produces food. So like raising animals for slaughter was his example. So, I mean, I think that's the clear answer. Although one could understand the tension and the argument on the other side. As a Buddhist, that's the text. It couldn't be any clearer.
If I could push back a little, Bob, sure, on behalf of where the question might be coming from, one could, what I take it is that the person who posed the question is suggesting is that actually the number of lives of sentient beings that are being saved is much greater. Mm-hmm. And the ecosystem that is being saved is much greater. And one Buddhist example that might come to mind is from the Jataka tales, where the Bodhisattva, the Buddha in a previous life, mm-hmm, if there's someone who's intending to kill the 500 merchants and steal their things, the Bodhisattva kills that merchant to prevent that person from taking on the negative karma, and that maybe this is certainly you find in the Jataka tales, but maybe it's more prominent in Mahayana Buddhism, that the recognition that there can be times when, to reduce suffering overall, one might have to do things that might be proscribed and against certain kinds of clear rules. And so what I'm hearing from the person posing the question is that, yes, there are cows who are being killed, and at least from the perspective of the people who started this organization and the perspective of the person who is taking this deeply seriously and asking the question, it doesn't seem like there's another alternative that really preserves many lives. Andrea, I see you unmuted yourself, and it looks like you want to jump in. Go ahead.
I think I don't know about the program or what it is, but I think I would like some more clarification. Which beings are being saved by the animals being killed? I'm not sure if you have the answer to this, but I don't think I understand quite well.
Well, I don't know if the person can message me if they want, but there are classical examples of like Norwegian rats coming to an island in the South Pacific and decimating the ecosystem by eating birds' eggs, or pigs, for example, in Hawaii, or rabbits in Australia, that you're confronted with a situation where one species can come in because they're not native, and you're confronted with a situation of, if you don't somehow remove a particular species, you are going to lose all the local native species, or large numbers of local native animals. And so either way, by not doing anything, one is allowing lots of animals to be killed. And my understanding from the question is that would be the instance here, that there's land preservation going on in some way that keeps an ecosystem available for native species, native animal species, mountain lions, deer, rabbits, etc., all the animals that live on the land. I'm just reading on the land can find enough food to eat now because the plants are not overeating. At any rate, I don't know that we'll come to a conclusion, but I think my own perspective might be slightly, and I think it's okay for us to have different perspectives. Maybe my own perspective is more Mahayana influenced. I don't know that I would have exactly the clarity that, Bob, that you have on this one.
Fair enough. I understand it. I'm speaking, as I said, from the point of view of what the Buddha said. And yeah, I mean, there may be times when you have to take action against one sentient being in order to save other sentient beings, and I respect it and understand that. So it doesn't come up very much, by the way. I would just be happy if Buddhists would stop eating the animals.
Yeah. Right. So what it does bring up is, and what I appreciate about the question is somebody taking very deeply and seriously the question of right livelihood.
Yep.
And I also appreciate about the question is that it gets at the way we're all kind of complicit in violence. You know, if we drive a car, any of the food that we consume, having the power on, having Zoom going on, the power necessary to do all this, leads to violent consequences for all kinds of species and all kinds, including humans. And that there's so many moral calls on us, and luckily the Buddhist path allows for rebirth and many thousands of lives to respond to them, because we can't respond to all of them now. I want to get back to some more of the questions that came in. Here's a really lovely one. Hello and much gratitude to you all. I'd love to hear what your vision of animal liberation looks like. Another way to put this is, what dreams sit in your heart when considering animal liberation? Andrea or Bob, do you want to?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, William? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the question is getting at is what is your vision of what animal liberation looks like in the future? What is your hope? What is your aspiration? Like, is there a vision of animal liberation to which we can all be drawn? And what might that look like? Does that make sense?
Well, I want to say just something really short if Andrea wants to get to it. So my vision is, first of all, people ask me why Dharma Voices for Animals? Why the Buddhist community? So first thing is I'm Buddhist. And the second thing is there's enough on our plate right now. And so I'm happy when one person, you mentioned about your family and changing diets and stuff like that. I mean, that made me really happy. So I know it's estimated maybe 15, sometimes I've heard 20,000 animals are killed to feed a person in their lifetime in the US. It's much different in Asia, less, but still significant. I mean, I'm just happy to hear that. But I want to persuade all the Buddhists, those that are serious about their sila, their ethical responsibility, to stop eating animals and not eat animal products. And it causes a lot of suffering, as we know also. And I'm happy with that. So, I mean, that's my vision for the Buddhist world, that people would actually take the teaching seriously.
Andrea, did you want to add anything?
Just to add on to that, because I'm coming from an animal rights perspective, it's just for us to live in a world where we don't take what's not ours and what's not given. These animals, they don't sacrifice themselves for us. If you go into a slaughterhouse, you'll see every single one try to fight and get out and escape. So if we live in a world where we're not taking what's not ours and what's not freely given, that's what that will be animal liberation to me.
Okay. Usually with events like this, we don't open it up to the floor, and you can imagine the reasons for that, because there's always somebody who kind of talks for too long and takes up the space. But I can't help, Elena, you had asked that question. Do you have a vision of animal liberation that you would like to share, or is that putting you on the spot too much? It was such a beautiful question.
I'm happy to, Andrea. I love what you mentioned. That was so eloquent to further go off of what you mentioned, to not take what is ours, to allow beings true agency and true compassion, how that manifests. And I could go on about this for a while. It's those dreams that help ground me as an activist and as a vegan, coming back to those spaces. So I appreciate both comments. So thank you so much.
And since we've opened it up, does anybody else want to share comments, reflections, questions in your own voice? Yeah, Ernst, go ahead.
Yeah, just I had asked the question about the Dharma centers in the U.S., and I'm happy to hear that Spirit Rock is going towards vegan. That's new and really great to hear. Not the case yet for San Francisco Zen Center and other places, and where so often it's the vegan is the exception or the dietary restriction, and people who want to work that way are the ones who have to go back into the kitchen to get the special plate rather than what's actually offered. And it's always relating to the last question here. It's always struck me as so odd that just the simplicity of not taking what's not given, of wanting the best life, of the wishes of compassion for other beings, and going well beyond the issue of not killing, but the quality of life of animals that are kept for dairy, which, as we know, is just can't exist without tremendous violence towards those animals, is just mind-boggling. So yeah, I'm looking. Thank you so much for your work, and I will try to be some eyes and ears on the ground for my local Dharma centers here. So thank you.
First, are you with at San Francisco Zen Center?
I'm not living there, but I've participated with them a fair bit. I live very nearby.
Great.
They have 3 centers that are. There's a lot of resistance there to being vegan. We've tried talking with people there.
Good. Please email us, friends@dharmavoiceforanimals.org, and so that's a place we definitely want to be. And also talk, and also Tassajara and the
Green Gulch. Yeah.
Green Gulch. Yeah.
Yeah. All 3 of their centers. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Rick, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. I think the one thing that has been most important in my learning about this issue is that it's very complex. And if nothing else, I have learned to be very appreciative and patient and understanding with those who can't go there, who can't stop eating animals. There's a karmic reason for that. And in that sense, it is no different than any other obstruction or obstacle we have mentally or emotionally. We can't expect an unripe apple to fall from the tree. And so I've learned to be very humble about it, to make my ethics and my approach to Buddhism very obvious, without hiding it or anything, articulate it clearly, without asking anybody to join me, and just to be an example of that it can be done, and then to have as much humility as I can muster for compassion for those who can't go there. I think we need as much compassion for those people as we do need for the animals. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. And maybe one last comment from Ed.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Great.
So I'm going to stop moving my camera for a second. So I wanted to share that as an animal rights activist myself, I do know Andrea, and I also am a Buddhist practitioner, that everybody has a different way of contributing and acting upon their beliefs and their Shila and their will toward animal liberation. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the action always has to be in a particular stereotypical way of maybe aggressively approaching people or passively in some other cases, if you believe that that's the correct Buddhist way of handling things. But that right action involves your own personal background and experience. And I myself, as an artist, going to different meditation centers such as the Goenka Vipassana centers, which are vegetarian but they're not vegan, and articulating that the 5 precepts that are taken for non-killing, non-stealing, not lying, not taking intoxicants, and sexual misconduct, that these are all violated within the dairy industry. And I want to reach out to Buddhist Dharma Voices for the Animals, because I am planning to put together a pamphlet that helps articulate why the dairy industry violates these five precepts. I won't get into that now, but in doing so, my hope is that my contribution, my approach to providing this information and ideally bringing more light to the people who attend these retreats through these pamphlets that I plan to create, is that when they also put pressure on the people who organize these centers, that they will ultimately start transitioning toward following the precepts and becoming more becoming more compassionate toward all beings, including that they say that they want to be, that they meditate on, that they use metta meditation to contribute and give compassion toward all beings, that they would actually live that and follow that within their centers. And so that this is my way of contributing, and I hope that other people will find their ways of contributing themselves and taking action within their own personal capacities and their Buddhist practices and communities. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ed. We are coming towards the end of our time together. There's a band called Emma's Revolution. Some of you may know them. And they have a song called Preaching to the Choir. And it's about the benefits when you are doing work that is not necessarily mainstream, but being with a group of like-minded people. And in some ways, I feel like that's what this time has been a little bit. And that's important to be strengthened and supported by being in this kind of a context. Before we end, I wanted to say that as a Buddhist center, we do not have contracts with the people who speak with us or who teach for us, in this case, Bob and Andrea. I imagine many of you, not all of you, are familiar with the notion of dana, where our English word donation comes from. It means generosity in classical Indian languages such as Sanskrit or Pali. It's the first virtue of the Bodhisattva because it is both a practice of relinquishing that to which we cling and also a way of meeting the needs of others. And in this case, the dana is going to Dharma Voices for Animals. And so when I think of meeting the immediate needs of others, and how effectively this money is being used in places like Sri Lanka and Thailand and Vietnam, where it can go so far, that it is really meeting the needs of others and others who may not have a voice. And so, Mindy, thank you so much for putting the 2 links in the chat. One is to make an offering, a dana gift to Dharma Voices for Animals. And the other is a survey to get feedback on our program tonight that can help us think about our future programs and also maybe be helpful to Andrea and Bob to see some of your responses. So I am so grateful, Andrea and Bob, for joining us this evening, and to everyone else for joining us. Maybe if you want to unmute and say goodnight, everybody, you can. And thank you, Andrea and Bob, for your good work with Dharma Voices for Animals, which is so important.
Thank you, William. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
For showing up, wherever you are on this issue. Thank you for showing up.